Darkcast Network, the light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Content warning ahead. This podcast contains very sensitive topics such as missing persons, unsolved cases, haunted houses, and paranormal activity. These type of topics can contain very upsetting and sensitive details and stories. Please listen responsibly. Welcome to Misty Mysteries. I'm your host, Keely. This is a true crime and paranormal podcast, and I am so happy to be back. This is the first episode of the new year, and it's exciting to be back into a recording routine. Misty Mysteries this year is going to be trying a few new things. The first thing is I'm going to be doing themes for each month. Most months for true crime will be locations, while the paranormal is more of a theme. This way I can focus on missing persons and unsolved cases from specific locations, but still have fun with the paranormal. For this month's theme, a little drum roll please, is going to be historical figures who either disappeared mysteriously, had mysterious deaths, or played a role in the paranormal world. This episode is on Harry Houdini, his life and death, and the role he played in spiritualism. This is a topic I've been so excited about since hearing M from And That's Why We Drink talk about it. So after a short promo from one of my podcasting friends, I'm going to jump right into this topic.
Hello everyone, my name is Gregory Zink, and I'd like to welcome you to my political true crime podcast called Smoke-Filled Rooms. With my background in political science, I present deep dive storytelling shows that focus on history's most infamous governments, leaders, parties, policies, and discontents. For at the core of society's dysfunctions are the criminal powers that lord over us, and the attempts by competing interests to strike back at the system. So grab a couple cigars and meet me behind the Capitol building for bi-weekly episodes featuring the political realm's most diabolical. The Smoke-Filled Rooms podcast is a member of the Darkcast network and is available wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure to visit smokefilledrooms.net to sign up for my mailing list. Listener discretion is advised for topics including violence, coarse language, substance use, sex, and disturbing situations. We'll see you soon.
Alright, welcome back. Let's dive right into who Harry Houdini was. If you don't know, he was a Hungarian-American escape artist, magician, and stunt performer, known particularly for his escape acts. Harry Houdini was born as Eric Wess on March 24th, 1874 in Hungary. He was one of 7 children born to Rabbi Mayer Samuel Wess and his second wife, Cecilia. At an early age, his parents moved him and his siblings to Appleton, Wisconsin, when his father got a job at a German-speaking church there. And though he wasn't born there, in many interviews, Houdini actually claims Wisconsin as his birthplace instead of Hungary. Unfortunately, the church felt that the rabbi was too stuck in the old ways and he was let go from the church. With 9 mouths to feed, times were tough and they ended up moving to Milwaukee, where Houdini began to work odd jobs like shining shoes and selling newspapers. It was here he saw his first circus and became very interested in the art of trapeze. At 7 years old, he began to teach himself how to walk the tightrope that he set up in his backyard to teach himself. Even trying a trick he saw at the circus where the tightrope walker hung from the rope by his teeth, but when young Houdini tried it, he knocked out his front teeth. He also became interested with locks at this time, learning how to pick locks by sneaking treats out of the kitchen when his mom wasn't looking. By 12 years old, young Houdini left home for Delaware, Wisconsin, to try to make his own in this world. Here he met a mother figure who took care of him, and in return, he spent the rest of his life sending her gifts and taking care of her for the kindness she showed him as a kid. He later met back up with his father in New York City, where he did his best to work odd jobs and make money to help care for his mother like he promised his father he would. Here he worked at a necktie company and would perform in shows, though these shows never truly took off. This is where he found his name, Harry Houdini. He read a book called The Memoirs of Robert Houdin, Ambassador, Author, and Conjurer, written by himself. This was a famous French magician who started off as a street performer and later invented many different magic tricks using electromagnetism to move objects using the stage. When young Houdini learned about Robert, he created his pseudonym. He felt his name shortened often sounded like Harry, which is where he got Harry, and he got his last name by simply adding an I. Just like that, he became Harry Houdini. Under his new pseudonym, he began to practice magic, but it wasn't until his father's passing in 1892 that he began to pursue magic full time. Together, the two did card tricks, simple rope escapes, and trunk escapes. Together, they even got to perform at the 1893 Chicago World Fair sideshow. The next year, his act truly changed when he met Beatrice Rayner, who was working with the Floral Sisters. Theo and some of the girls from her act got together to arrange a blind date. Beatrice, also known as Bess, and Harry fell in love at first sight. After 3 weeks, the two ended up getting married. The two really didn't have much money to start off their marriage, but they had each other. Bess took over for Theo, going by her lifelong stage name, Bess Houdini, and acting as his assistant on stage. Bess helped Harry bring a strong showmanship to his act, plus the two spent some time working in a circus where Harry picked up strongman tricks, sword swallowing, he learned to use his toes like fingers, and he picked up on an act where he could swallow a bunch of needles with a thread. The audience would then look in his mouth and see nothing, then he would pull the thread with the needles threaded onto it. Houdini would eventually leave these tricks behind, focusing on his escape acts. He did a tour in Europe where he would create some of his most famous escapes that still inspire people today. When he would first show up to a new place, he would have the local police arrest him nearly naked, confirming he had no keys or tools on him, only for him to break out of the cell, ensuring that he would make headlines in the local paper to sell out his show. He would walk through brick walls, and anything concerning a lock, chain, or handcuffs were his specialty. He would chain himself up, and after chaining himself up, he would then have a local business bring an item he could be locked into, like a trunk, a box, a barrel, and even a giant paper envelope, only to escape the item and his chains. He would jump off of bridges, no matter the weather, and he would be handcuffed. Sometimes he'd even be locked inside a crate and pushed off the bridge. On one occasion in London, he came back up with a second figure that turned out to be a dead body he had found on the bottom of the river. Houdini would have himself placed into a canvas or leather regulated straitjacket, and his feet would be bound. A crane would then lift him upside down, high above the ground. He would move around erratically and violently as he dangled high above the ground. He would eventually free himself from the straitjacket and chains and be lowered back to the ground. In one of his most iconic, Houdini would be placed in a large metal milk can that was full of milk or water, and then the lid would be shut and padlocked. A screen was placed in front of the can, and after what seemed like too much time, since he could hold his breath for 3 minutes, a soaking wet Houdini would appear outside of the milk can. When he returned home, he became an international celebrity, and he continued to push the boundaries of his show. In 1918, Houdini was given the opportunity to work with a 10,000-pound elephant named Jenny. Even though he was performing in this bright arena with bright lights, he was able to make Jenny disappear into thin air in front of the whole audience. And an act that he is very well associated with, and it's definitely seen in movies and TV shows, is his escape of the Chinese water torture cells. Houdini's feet would be bound, and he would be then lifted upside down above the stage. Then he would be lowered into a tall glass container that is filled with water. A lid is put on that container and locked down, and the entire cabinet is covered with a curtain. A member of Houdini's crew would be waiting on stage in full view of the audience with a fire axe, ready to break the glass in case Houdini could not escape. Houdini always escaped, although he never encouraged others to try this, naming it his most dangerous escape. One escape artist sadly tried this but never made it out while trying to copy Houdini. Many believe that this is how Harry Houdini died, but this is far from the truth. In fact, Harry Houdini's death is contributed to one of his acts, but not an escape. Harry was invited to give a lecture at McGill University in Montreal. Before this, he had injured his ankle doing the Chinese water torture cell performance, but still went to the lecture. After his lecture, a few students wanted to meet him, and they were invited to meet him in the dressing rooms. The students were Gordon Whitehead, Jacques Price, and Sam Smilovitz. Houdini had a very popular claim at this point. He claimed he could be punched in the stomach as hard as possible and sustain no injuries. Gordon asked about this claim, but before Houdini could tighten up his abdominal muscles to prepare for the punch, Gordon punched Houdini multiple times. It's widely believed that these punches may have caused Houdini's appendix to burst, leading to his death. Although medical science argues this idea many times, explaining that most likely the punches were actually just bad timing to when his appendix burst. That night, Houdini really struggled with an awful fever. He was sweating and in pain, but he still went to his Detroit show that next day, and this was sadly his last show. That night, he was diagnosed with a ruptured appendix, and when the doctors removed it, the infection had already spread. A week later, Harry Houdini died on Halloween of 1926, at the age of 52. His official cause of death is the ruptured appendix, although this never stopped or stops any rumors of something more mysterious or malicious from being the real cause of death. So here's the thing about Houdini. When he returned home and he had more money coming his way than he could think of, he bought homes and made sure to take care of his mother up until her passing. He also started a magazine called Conjurers Monthly in 1906. He used this to write articles about enemies, write book reviews that were not always the ones authors may have wanted. He talked about his own tricks. He even wrote a book around this time, originally honor Robert Houdin, the man who he got his name from, and advised him to focus on escape tricks, which really helped bring Houdini to be who he was. But he ended up exposing him for stealing tricks from others. Houdini made his friends, but he also but definitely pissed people off too. In particular, he came after the spiritualism community. Even though his good friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author behind Sherlock Holmes, was a big supporter of this movement. Spiritualism itself is a whole topic, but to understand what happened with Houdini and the movement, I'm going to give you sort of a short summary. Spiritualism is a movement based on the belief that departed souls or the dead can interact with the living. This can be done through a number of ways, but most of the time in spiritualism with mediums during the acts of seances. Spiritualism has been around for a long time, becoming popular throughout many different periods of time, but when Harry Houdini was alive, it was the Fox sisters who sparked the modern-day movement of spiritualism. In modern-day spiritualism, there were many who took advantage of those grieving their loved ones to fill their own pockets. It's largely believed that the loss of Houdini's mother on July 17th of 1913 is what pushed him into his essentially crusade against spiritualism, but his interest came long before that. Houdini, in a book he authored in 1906, wrote, "Spiritualism has many followers, and at one point I was almost a believer. But this was before I made a thorough investigation, which I have followed up even to this present day. I have never seen materialization or manifestation which I cannot fully explain. Spiritualism is really a beautiful belief, but for those that are honest and believe in it. But as I have visited the greatest spiritualist meeting in the world, I'm sorry to say that no one has ever produced anything for me that would smack the spiritual. In the future, I contemplate writing a book on spiritualistic methods and how they do their tricks. I do not mean genuine spiritualists who have no tricks, but those mediums who use their knowledge of magic to gain a living." Houdini did go on to write a book about these trickster mediums called Miracle Mongrels and their methods. Houdini never believed the living could communicate with the dead, and he had attended over 100 seances in his life, but still never believed. One seance that really stood out was a session in an attempt to contact his own mother. His friend, Arthur Doyle, knew how close Houdini was with his mother in life, and the grief he was experiencing after her death. In an attempt to help Houdini, he set up an automatic writing session with his wife known as Lady Doyle, who claimed to be a medium. Houdini didn't go in hopes to disprove anyone. He did want to believe, but never found the evidence he needed to believe. Lady Doyle had to be in a trance state to do automatic writing, which allows her to write written word without her consciously writing it. It's believed that spirits take control to write the words. When the writing started, Lady Doyle drew a Christian cross on the paper and began to write in English. Houdini's mother did not speak or write in English, and she was Jewish. Houdini concluded that this alleged communication was delusional and deceptive, as well as a troubling indication of religious mania. Houdini even put some blame on spiritualism for the death of John W. Edmund. He had a heart attack that ended up taking his life when he tried to make contact with his late wife's spirit. Houdini's efforts to publicly expose the trickster mediums really started in October 1922, when he authored an article called Ghosts That Talk by Radio. This included the expose of an unnamed medium who used a radio hidden in a tea kettle to produce a talking tea kettle. With this, Houdini began to anger magicians that felt he was giving away their tricks. This did not stop Houdini. He began to give lectures on trickster mediums and even gave a speech on spiritualism at the Society of American Magicians banquet in October of 1922. By 1924, he only intensified with his hunt for fraud in the community. He built a business and reputation as a debunker of mediums. In January of 1924, Houdini secured a spot on a committee sponsored by a prestigious magazine, Scientific America, to investigate spiritualists. In February of 1924, he signed on with the company as a lecturer of spiritualism and fraudulent mediums, where he then set off on a 24-town, 24-lecture tour, ranging from Ohio to Florida. That spring, Houdini also wrote a book called A Magician Amongst the Spirits, a book exposing spiritualists. In addition, he wrote 2 short stories on fake spiritualism for a popular magazine. Houdini did another 8-week lecture tour on fraudulent mediums in October of 1924. And Houdini not only put himself out there, openly challenging those he felt were fraudulent, but he set up a network of undercover agents to investigate these spiritualists. One of his agents investigated over 300 mediums, which she shared that they all would tell her about the spirits of her dead children or father. She had no children, and her father was still alive. Houdini himself debunked many mediums, but he specifically was targeting a woman named Nina Crandon, also known in her medium life as Marjorie. She was supported by Houdini's good friend Arthur Doyle. When Houdini honed in on Marjorie and debunked other mediums, he and Doyle had a harsh falling out. Doyle, a firm believer in spiritualism, especially in his later years, refused to give credit to any of Houdini's debunkings. Doyle believed that Houdini had performed many of his stunts by means of paranormal ability and was using those abilities to block the power of the mediums that he was supposedly debunking. This led to the men who were once good friends to publicly become, well, enemies, pretty much. Before his death in 1926, he hired H.P. Lovecraft and his friend C.M. Eddy Jr. to write an entire book about debunking religious miracles, which was going to be called The Cancer of Superstition. But after his death, this book was never written since Bess did not wish to continue with it. Unfortunately, with the death of Houdini, he never was able to expose Marjorie, though she was later exposed by a Harvard student. Despite him openly debunking mediums and spiritualism, it's important to remember that he is the son of a rabbi, and he did believe in an afterlife. So of course Houdini did not give up his research even in the afterlife. Before his death, he and Bess agreed on a code that only she and he would know depending on who passed first, which ultimately was him. With that, they would be able to communicate to each other from the afterlife. This message was Rosabelle Believe, because their favorite song was a song named Rosabelle. On the first year anniversary of Houdini's death, Halloween of 1927, she held a seance to see if he could communicate with her. Bess held these seances on Halloween for 10 years after Houdini's death. She did claim to have contact once in the 10 years through Arthur Ford in 1929, when Ford conveyed the secret code. But Bess later said that this incident has been faked by Ford when he used clues to confirm the code, which was confirmed after his death in 1971 by his personal biographer. The last seance that Bess ever held was on the 10-year anniversary of Houdini's death in 1936 on the roof of the Knickerbocker Hotel. On this night, she had put out the candle that she had lit by the picture of him since his passing in 1926. In 1943, the year that Bess actually passed away from a heart attack, on February 11th, 1943, at the age of 67, she came forward and said, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man, when asked about the last seance. In death, Bess wished to be buried next to Harry in his family plot, but because her family was in the Catholic faith, they refused to bury her in the Jewish cemetery with Harry. Unfortunately, I don't believe she has ever been able to move to be with Harry, but we can only hope she is now with him, maybe lecturing him on letting her wait 10 years. The grave of Harry and his family have had to be restored throughout the years due to people defacing them, but they are now private in hopes to keep them safe. The seances, in an attempt to further Houdini's research and maybe communicate with him, have continued on, even to this day, by different organizations. At this point in the episode, I am all out of Harry Houdini information. Thank you so much for being here. If you'd like to learn more about these monthly themes as they come and what I have going on with Misty Mysteries, please check out the forms in the episode description to fill out your information for our monthly newsletter. For now, please be safe out there, stay warm, stay hydrated, and I will see you next week.